The rain drummed steadily against the rattling windows of the number 14 bus. As it crawled through the slick streets of Detroit, the city lights shimmered in distorted puddles, and the passing cars hissed as their tires cut through sheets of water. Toward the very back of the bus, tucked into a seat too big for her small frame, sat 12-year-old Lucy Thompson. Her thin arms were curled protectively around her backpack, and her head bent low over a battered notebook balanced on her knees. The soft scratch of her pencil was almost drowned by the rain, but her mind wasn't in the wet streets outside it. It was inside the world she carried with her, gears, joints, and circuits that filled every page with impossible machines. She pressed harder with her pencil, drawing the hinge of a knee joint with careful detail. Her tongue stuck out slightly, a habit she'd never broken, as she made sure the joint could actually bend the way a real leg might. A smudge of graphite darkened her fingers, but Lucy didn't care. For her, this was comfort. This was control. Out there in the classroom, she was the weird girl who preferred building robots to braiding hair. The kid no one invited to birthday parties. But here, in the neat lines and scribbles of her designs, she was someone who could fix things, someone who belonged. From the driver's seat at the front of the bus, Mr. Harris watched her through the rearview mirror. His gray mustache twitched as he shifted gears, his large hand steady on the wheel. He'd driven this route for 20 years, long enough to notice patterns, long enough to spot the kids who carried heavy loads that had nothing to do with backpacks. Lucy was one of them, too quiet for her age, too old in the eyes, and always with that notebook. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying back through the nearly empty bus. Keep that brain of yours shining, kid. One day, people will see what you've got there. Lucy startled slightly, glancing up from her sketch. Mr. Harris's gaze flicked back to the road, but she caught the hint of a smile in his mirror. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and she ducked her head again, pretending to shade the drawing. But inside, something stirred an ember of encouragement, fragile but warm. The bus slowed as it turned onto Maple Street, its wipers squeaking across the windshield. Lucy pressed her forehead lightly against the cold glass, letting her eyes drift to the world outside. Kids her age huddled beneath umbrellas, laughing as they splashed each other with their boots. She watched them with that familiar ache, then forced her gaze away. It was then that she saw him. On the corner, slouched in a weathered wheelchair, sat a man with a cardboard sign propped awkwardly against one wheel. Veteran. Lost legs. Any help appreciated. The letters were shaky, but bold enough to read through the blur of rain. His beard was overgrown, his clothes ragged, but it was his eyes that made Lucy freeze. They were startlingly clear, a piercing blue that didn't match the rest of him. Eyes that scanned the street not with desperation, but with something sharper curiosity, awareness. As though he were looking through the people rushing past, rather than at them. Lucy blinked, her breath fogging the glass. Something about him felt wrong, or maybe right. Not like the beggars she'd been taught to ignore. Not like the broken people most just walked by. His gaze lingered on the streams of water racing down the curb, almost as if he were calculating their speed. She felt an odd pull in her chest, an instinct she couldn't name, to stop and ask him a question not about the rain or the weather, but about whether he, too, ever thought about how things worked, how they might be fixed. The light changed. The bus lurched forward, and the figure vanished into the blur of the city. But Lucy stayed pressed to the glass, her pencil resting forgotten against her notebook. For a moment, she couldn't shake the image of those sharp blue eyes staring out from a face the world had written off. A whisper of something possibility maybe stirred in her gut behind the wheel. Mr. Harris hummed a low tune, stealing one more glance in the mirror at the girl in the back seat. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet world of sketches and circuits was about to collide with something much larger, and the man on the corner, with eyes too bright for his rags, would change everything. The rain had stopped by the next afternoon, leaving the city wrapped in a damp chill that clung to every brick wall and broken sidewalk. Lucy stepped off the school bus, with her backpack tugging at her shoulders, heavy not just with books, but with the weight of another lonely day. She had eaten lunch in silence again, sketching in the corner, while Amber Jenkins whispered and laughed loud enough for Lucy to hear. Even Mr. Parker's praise for her latest science project couldn't soften the sting of being invisible or, worse, ridiculed. She kept her eyes down as she walked, sneakers splashing through shallow puddles, until the familiar corner came into view, and there he was. The man in the wheelchair sat exactly where she'd seen him the day before, the cardboard sign leaning against his wheel. He looked like any other beggar to the stream of people rushing past him and inconvenience. A shadow to be avoided, but Lucy's eyes went straight to his, those same sharp blue eyes, alert and alive, caught hers for an instant. Something in the way they studied her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with recognition, made her slow her steps against her better judgment. You carry tools in that bag of yours? His voice was low, steady, almost too articulate for the man he appeared to be, startled. Lucy hugged her backpack closer. It's just parts from Robotics Club. He tilted his head, and a faint smile touched the corners of his bearded mouth. Looked like a circuit board poking out. Motion sensor? Her jaw dropped before she could stop herself. How did you know that? Because I used to fix things too, he said simply, tapping the side of his wheelchair. Before, he gestured vaguely to where his legs should have been. The city noise faded around them as Lucy found herself, for the first time, speaking to someone who seemed to understand her language. She knelt a little closer, the cold air brushing her cheeks, and whispered, I'm trying to make it more sensitive to smaller movements, but it keeps misfiring. You're adjusting the sensor array, aren't you? His voice carried the certainty of someone who had been there before. Instead, try tweaking the capacitor threshold. Cleaner response, less noise. Her heart skipped. No teacher had ever given her advice so specific. No classmate had ever cared enough to try. This stranger, sitting in the shadows of a city that had forgotten him, had just solved in one sentence the problem she'd been wrestling with for weeks. For nearly 20 minutes, Lucy forgot she was on a street corner with a man others refused to see. They spoke about circuits, about battery drains, about the delicate balance between efficiency and power. He listened without condescension, asked questions that stretched her thinking, and nodded with a spark of approval that filled her with a strange, fierce pride. Finally, he glanced at the darkening sky. You should get home, kid. Don't want your parents worrying. Lucy swallowed. Just my mom, she said quietly. My dad. He passed away. He was an engineer. Something softened in his eyes. Then he'd be proud. Not many kids your age can reconfigure a circuit board on their own. The words landed in her chest like a promise, both heavy and uplifting. She gave a small, shaky smile. Thanks, maybe I'll see you around. As she walked away, backpack straps digging into her shoulders, she felt something buzzing inside her, not fear, not sadness, but possibility. That man wasn't just a beggar. He wasn't what he seemed, and as she replayed his advice in her mind, her thoughts began to race faster than her footsteps. That night, under the soft glow of her desk lamp, Lucy opened her sketchbook. She stared at the blank page for a long moment, then carefully wrote a title across the top in her neat, determined handwriting. Project New Legs for Jack. She didn't know why she wrote it, didn't fully understand the impulse, but she knew the image of his empty wheelchair would not leave her mind. If her father had taught her anything, it was this: if you can't buy it, build it yourself. Her pencil moved furiously, sketching joints, motors, makeshift supports out of scrap she knew she could scavenge. For hours she lost herself in diagrams, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and purpose. She could almost hear her father's voice in the room with her. Every problem has a solution. You just haven't found it yet. Somewhere outside, the city slept, unaware that in a cramped little apartment, a 12-year-old girl was daring to solve the impossible. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet imagine, was how deeply this act of compassion would entwine her fate with the man in the wheelchair, nor how dangerous, how powerful, and how life-altering this secret project would become. The storm had passed, but in Lucy's life, something far greater had just begun to stir. The week that followed became a battlefield of failures. Lucy's small bedroom transformed into a graveyard of broken parts and abandoned sketches. The floor littered with stripped wires, cracked plastic, and batteries that had leaked their acid scars across old math homework. Every night she worked until her eyes burned, her hands blistered from gripping cheap pliers too long, her ears ringing from the hiss of a soldering iron that sometimes sparked more smoke than progress. Her first attempt was laughable to broomsticks, cut unevenly, clumsy hinges bolted from an old desk chair, and foam padding from the torn armrest of their couch. She stared at them, proud for a single heartbeat, before strapping the legs to her desk and stacking textbooks on top. The weight snapped them like twigs. She buried her face in her hands, furious tears soaking the page where she'd written Prototype 1, but Lucy was her father's daughter. She dragged the wreckage into a box and scrawled across it, "Lessons learned." She remembered something he once told her while tightening bolts on a homemade windmill. If it breaks, it just means you learned what doesn't work. That's progress to DOS, so she tried again. Prototype 2 was better. She found shock absorbers from an old mountain bike in the alley and wired them into the knees. Motors from remote-controlled cars into the ankles. For a shining 20 minutes she thought she'd cracked the code. The legs actually stood upright when she propped them against the bed, humming faintly like living things. But when she powered them on, the batteries drained in minutes. The knees locked without warning, sending the whole contraption clattering to the ground. The sound was so violent that her mother burst into the room in panic, only to find Lucy standing in the middle of her mess, trembling with frustration. "Lucy Thompson." Olivia's voice cracked with fear and anger. "You could have electrocuted yourself, or burned the whole building down." Lucy lifted her chin, tears still streaming but her voice firm. "I figured out what I did wrong. I just need better power regulation." Her mother pressed her palm against her forehead, caught between exasperation and awe. "Sweetheart, you're 12. Dad wouldn't want me to quit," Lucy whispered. That ended the argument. Olivia didn't take away her tools, though. She did unplug the soldering iron for the night. By Prototype 3. Lucy was using the school's workshop in secret. Mr. Parker thought she was just chasing a science fair project. He smiled when he saw her rewiring laptop batteries to create a stable supply system. Impressed by her focus, "Ingenious," he muttered, unaware that his casual encouragement was the fuel she needed. But back home, when the test legs overheated and the acrid stench of melted plastic filled her room, the fire alarm screamed and smoke rolled across the ceiling. Olivia threw open windows, waving a towel while Lucy, coughing, clutched her notebook like a lifeline. That night she sat in the corner of her bed, surrounded by burnt wires, and whispered to herself, "Maybe Mom's right. Maybe this is too big for me." The next day, she took a different route home, avoiding Jack's corner, avoiding the piercing eyes that had ignited this impossible mission. But fate had its own plans. As she passed the public library, she saw him again, wheeling himself slowly up the ramp in the misty drizzle. His voice carried across the sidewalk when he spotted her. "Lucy," he called, almost like he'd been expecting her. "Haven't seen you in a while." She froze, half ashamed, half relieved. He wheeled closer, his gaze cutting right through the wall she tried to build around her failure. "Something's bothering you." Her lips trembled before the words tumbled out. How do you not give up when everything keeps breaking, when nothing works?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he rolled up his sleeve, revealing scars running jagged across his forearm. "See these? Third-degree burns. Trying to disarm an IED. Spent 8 months relearning how to use my hands. And then, 6 months later, another blast took my legs." Lucy's eyes widened, her throat tightening. "After that," he continued softly, "I tried to give up. Stopped eating, stopped talking. Figured my story was already over. But a nurse told me something I've never forgotten. Failure isn't falling down, kid. Failure is refusing to get back up." His blue eyes locked on hers, sharp and unflinching. "So, tell me, what did your failures teach you?" Lucy's mind spun back through the prototypes, each one suddenly less like a tombstone and more like a breadcrumb trail. The first had taught her about weight distribution, the second, about battery capacity, the third, about heat regulation. She whispered, almost to herself, that I need better materials and a new way to spread the weight. Jack smiled faintly. "Sounds like you're on Prototype 4. Then, something inside her snapped back into place, not the fragile hope she had before, but something harder, sharper, forged by failure and lit by his words. As she walked home, she repeated it under her breath, each time firmer, each time stronger. Failure isn't falling down. It's refusing to get back up. That night, under the glow of her lamp, she opened her sketchbook again. Her pencil flew across the page with new urgency. Not erasing her old diagrams, but building on them. Motors from wheelchairs, aluminum from scrap, cooling systems from computers. Her mind raced with connections she hadn't seen before. She didn't know it yet. But this was the night she stopped being just a lonely girl with a notebook. This was the night Lucy Thompson became a builder of miracles. The morning air was brittle, heavy with the metallic scent of rain-soaked concrete. Lucy's hands shook as she zipped up her father's old duffel bag. the metal teeth rasping louder than usual. Inside the bag rested weeks of work, her latest and most daring prototype to prosthetic legs cobbled together from scrap aluminum, precision motors scavenged from an abandoned wheelchair, and joints reimagined from the click mechanisms of mechanical pencils. The whole contraption weighed more than she expected, pressing down on her arms as if testing her courage before she even left the apartment. Her mother had already left for her early shift, and the apartment was eerily silent. It should have been comforting, but silence made her more aware of her own pounding heartbeat. She scribbled a note for her mother, working on school project with Mrs. Wilson, and slipped out the door, locking it behind her with trembling fingers. The city was waking. Buses hissed at their stops, and factory workers trudged toward long shifts, their faces gray in the weak sunlight. Lucy kept her head down, the duffel strap digging into her shoulder, until she reached the abandoned lot behind her school. The lot was surrounded by chain-link fences that sagged like tired shoulders, and broken bottles glittered in the dirt like jagged jewels. It wasn't much, but it was flat, private, and far enough from curious eyes. Mrs. Wilson, the retired nurse who'd taken a strange but kind interest in Lucy's school project, was already there, her hair tucked under a wool hat. She carried a first aid kit in one hand, her expression calm but unreadable. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" she asked, watching Lucy struggle with the duffel. Lucy swallowed hard. "I have to be." A few minutes later, the crunch of wheels on gravel signaled Jack's arrival. He rolled through the broken gate, his hands strong on the rims of his chair, his face unreadable under his scruffy beard. His sharp blue eyes landed on the duffel bag, then flicked up to Lucy's determined expression. "You brought something." Without a word, Lucy knelt on the blanket she had spread across the dirt and unzipped the bag. The morning light glinted off the aluminum frames as she lifted them out, laying them side by side like artifacts from another world. Her heart lodged in her throat as Jack's gaze sharpened, his mouth parting in disbelief. "These are legs," he whispered, as though afraid the word would break the moment. "They're for you," Lucy said quickly, her voice small but firm. "I've been working on them since we met. They're not perfect, but I think they'll work." Jack stared, his fingers twitching slightly against the arms of his wheelchair. "Child," he said hoarsely, "do you have any idea what you've done? They might not hold. They might break. But I had to try. STAMME or ED. Mrs. Wilson cleared her throat gently. "If you're willing, I can help with the fitting. I've worked with amputee patients before." The next half hour blurred into a storm of concentration. Mrs. Wilson guided Lucy in adjusting the padding around Jack's residual limbs, tightening straps, and aligning the motors. Lucy explained how the pressure points work. "Step forward, weight down, motor activates." Her fingers trembled as she secured the last strap, every failure of the past week screaming in her mind. Jack gripped the chain-link fence beside him, his knuckles white, his face tight with something between terror and hope. "Ready?" he asked. Lucy nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was answering him or herself. With a grunt, Jack shifted his weight forward. The servos hummed like insects, the joints creaked, and for one heart-stopping moment the legs wobbled wildly as if they would collapse. Lucy held her breath, then the motors adjusted, the aluminum frame steadied, and Jack was standing shaky, awkward, but standing. Tears blurred Lucy's vision. Mrs. Wilson pressed a hand to her mouth, her own eyes glistening. Jack took one step. The left foot moved forward, bending at the knee just as Lucy had designed. Then another, the right leg following with surprising smoothness. The sound of the motors was faint, but steady, like a heartbeat made of metal. He let out a ragged laugh that cracked into a sob. "I'm walking," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm actually walking." Lucy couldn't breathe. She pressed both hands to her mouth as tears poured freely, watching the man she had met as a broken stranger take step after step across the dirt. 10 steps, 15. He turned clumsily, but he turned, and when he faced her again his face was wet with tears, his beard damp, his smile wide and radiant. In a rush of emotion, he stumbled forward and pulled her into a fierce, shaking embrace. His arms were strong, trembling against her small frame. "You gave me back my legs, kid. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." Her voice cracked when she tried to answer. "They'll need adjustments and stronger supports." "And Lucy," he interrupted gently, holding her at arm's length. His eyes, piercing and wet, burned into hers. "Don't you understand? You've already changed everything. None of them knew, not Lucy, not Mrs. Wilson. Not even Jack himself, that the ripples of this morning would spread far beyond the lot, beyond Detroit, beyond anything Lucy could imagine. All she knew was that a man who had once been trapped in a chair was walking toward her, step by step, on legs she had built with her own hands, and somewhere in the distance, faint but growing louder, the city streets carried the roar of an engine that would soon stop at Lucy's own door, bringing with it a revelation powerful enough to rewrite her entire life. Lucy could hardly sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jack rising from the wheelchair, his trembling steps echoing like thunder in her memory. She had replayed every sound: the soft hum of the motors, the scrape of aluminum, the ragged laugh that had broken into tears. For the first time in her life, something she had built had done more than just work. It had transformed someone's existence. But by morning, reality crept back in. She was still just Lucy Thompson, a 12-year-old girl with hand-me-down clothes and a single mother stretched thin by endless shifts. She still had to drag her heavy backpack through the rain-slicked streets of Detroit. At school, nothing changed. Amber Jenkins still whispered cruel jokes. Kevin Miller still knocked her books to the floor. None of them knew, none of them could even imagine that while they saw a weird little inventor, she was out there building miracles in secret. On the ride home that afternoon, Lucy sat in her usual seat at the back of the bus, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. She tried to redraw the legs, cataloging every success and every failure, but her pencil kept slipping. The storm inside her head was too loud. Mr. Harris, the bus driver, caught sight of her frown in the rearview mirror. "You look like you're carrying the whole world in that bag, kid," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Don't forget buses break down too. Doesn't mean they're not worth fixing." Lucy looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. She didn't know how much he'd seen or guessed, but his words were like a lantern in the fog. She tucked them away like she did with every scrap of encouragement. That night, she tried to settle back into routine. Dinner was leftover pasta. Her mother asked about school, her questions weary but loving. Lucy answered half-heartedly, her thoughts already drifting to the next improvements. She needed to make the weight distribution at the ankles, the battery regulation, the padding on the connection points. When her mom left for the night shift, Lucy sat at her desk, sketching until her eyes blurred. Then came the sound. At first it was distant, a low, throaty growl that didn't belong in their neighborhood of rusted sedans and second-hand minivans. It grew louder, a deep purr rolling through the thin apartment walls until it rattled the dishes in the sink. Lucy frowned, pushing back her chair. She padded barefoot to the window and peered through the streaked glass. Her breath caught a sleek, cherry-red Mustang convertible idled at the curb, its polished body gleaming beneath the flickering streetlight. The car looked like it had roared straight out of another world, a world of wealth, speed, and power. Its chrome wheels spun lazily as the engine purred. Far too expensive, far too perfect to belong anywhere near the tired brick building. Probably someone lost, Olivia murmured behind her, tying her waitress apron as she glanced out. But Lucy didn't answer. She couldn't. She was frozen, her heart hammering as the driver's door swung open. A man stepped out, and Lucy's world tilted on its axis. It was Jack, or at least, it looked like him, but not the Jack she knew. The unkempt beard was gone, replaced by a clean-shaven jaw. His hair, once wild and matted, was neatly trimmed. He wore a tailored gray suit that fit him like it had been crafted by invisible hands. But the unmistakable part wasn't the suit, or the car, or even the sudden aura of authority that clung to him. It was the way he walked. The same steady gait, the faint hydraulic whisper she knew better than anyone else, echoed through the still night air. Step by step, he moved with confidence, with pride. On her legs, Lucy's hands tightened on the windowsill, her knuckles white. "Mom," she whispered hoarsely, "it's him," before Olivia could respond. The doorbell rang. The sound reverberated through their tiny apartment like a shot. Olivia frowned, adjusting her apron. Stranger for visitors, she moved to the door, wiping her hands on her jeans. Lucy trailed behind, her chest tight, every nerve buzzing. When the door swung open, the man stood framed in the hallway light. The same piercing blue eyes looked down at them, but everything else was transformed. He held a sleek leather briefcase at his side, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice steady, calm, refined. "My name is Nathan Reed. I believe you know me through your daughter." Olivia blinked, confused. I'm sorry. Who? Lucy's throat was dry. Mom, she whispered. It's Jack. The man smiled faintly with something like apology in his eyes. She's right. But my real name is Nathan Reed. For a moment, the world tilted into silence. Then Olivia's voice, sharp and protective, sliced through the air. You've been lying to my daughter. But Nathan Reed only straightened his shoulders, his gaze never wavering. I owe you both an explanation. The Mustang's engine still purred outside, the sound of wealth and power bleeding into their modest living room, as the man who had once been a beggar prepared to unravel the truth of who he really was and why he had sought out a poor little girl who built miracles in secret. The silence in the small apartment was so heavy it pressed against the walls, louder than the Mustang still rumbling outside. Olivia stood rigid by the doorway, her hands still clutching the frame as if it were the only thing keeping her balanced. Lucy hovered behind her, her eyes wide, her chest heaving with the effort to breathe. And Nathan Jack, whoever he truly was, stepped carefully into the room, his polished shoes clicking softly against the worn linoleum, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. He set his leather briefcase gently on the coffee table. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial, but it didn't ease the tension thickening in the air. Lucy's heart raced. She couldn't reconcile the man before her with the one she had shared peanut butter sandwiches with on a rainy curb. This was no beggar. His clean-shaven face caught the dull light, his suit whispering wealth in every stitch. Yet when her eyes drifted lower, she saw them the faint movements, the hydraulic hum, the subtle grace of the legs she had built. She gasped aloud. Those are mine. Nathan Reed. Jack no longer met her gaze with an intensity that made her shiver. They are, with some refinements my engineers added, but the core, the heart of these legs, Lucy, is yours. Olivia stepped forward, her protective instinct sharper than a blade. What kind of game are you playing with my daughter? You sat on a corner, pretending to be homeless, letting her think you were a broken man in need. What do you want from us? Nathan raised his hand slowly, like a man trying to calm a frightened animal. No game, no trick. The accident that took my legs 3 years ago was very real. I was testing a prototype aircraft designed by my company Reed Technologies. The crash shattered my body and nearly ended my life. Our medical division built me prosthetics worth millions. They gave me strength, speed, power, but none of it gave me peace. His voice grew heavier, his words carrying the weight of years. I became disconnected, surrounded by wealth, by people who nodded and smiled, but never looked me in the eye. I wanted to understand the world outside the boardroom again, so I did something reckless. I disguised myself. I lived among ordinary people, sometimes as a factory worker, sometimes as a cab driver, sometimes just as a homeless veteran. I wanted to see who noticed, who still cared, who would look past the disguise. Lucy's lips trembled, and I did. He nodded, his blue eyes glistening now. You did. Out of thousands who walked past me, only one child stopped. Only one spoke to me as if I were a person, not a ghost. You, Lucy Thompson. Olivia's voice cracked with anger and confusion. So what then? You used my daughter as some experiment. She's 12, for God's sake. Nathan's expression softened, and he sank carefully into a chair, the faint hiss of pistons from Lucy's legs echoing in the stillness. Your daughter did something no team of my top engineers could accomplish. She built prosthetics not for profit, not for prestige, but out of compassion, with scraps and fire in her heart. She created something that shouldn't be possible. Do you understand what that means? She has changed everything. Lucy blinked through tears. But you already had better ones. Yours cost millions. Why wear mine? Because yours are better where it matters, Nathan said simply. They're lighter, more adaptable. They fit to me, not to some ideal of perfection. The engineers in my company design for machines. You design for a person. That's what. I've forgotten in my world of numbers and stock prices that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. He reached slowly into his briefcase and slid out a thick folder of documents, placing them on the coffee table between them. This, he said, his voice steady but urgent, is a proposal, a scholarship to the Einstein Academy of Advanced Science's. Only 20 students in the world are chosen each year, and I want you to be one of them. Lucy, my company will patent your design under your name, not mine, not Reed Technologies. You will keep ownership, will manufacture it, refine it, distribute it to those who could never dream of affording prosthetics like mine. And beyond that, I want to establish a foundation in your name, one dedicated to building affordable medical innovations for those the world has forgotten." Olivia stared at the papers, her jaw tight, her arms folded, and in return, "What do you get?" Nathan smiled faintly, but there was no arrogance in it, only exhaustion. "I get reminded of why I became an engineer in the first place. I get to look in the mirror and see more than a billionaire who hid behind walls of money. And maybe, if I'm lucky, I get to walk the rest of my life not just on legs, but on hope built by a child who believed the impossible was worth trying." The room fell silent. The ticking clock on the wall filled the space between them. Lucy's eyes burned as she looked from her mother to Nathan, her small hands curling into fists at her sides. Everything inside her screamed that this was bigger than her, bigger than schoolyard bullies, bigger even than the man before her. This was about every Jack sitting on every corner of every city, waiting for someone to see them. Finally, she whispered, her voice raw and trembling but resolute, "Mom, I want to do this. Not for him, for them, for all the people who need it." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She reached for Lucy's hand, squeezing it tight, her gaze never leaving Nathan. "If you're lying, if you hurt her in any way, I'll burn the sky down around you." Nathan inclined his head solemnly. "Then let's make sure I never give you reason." The Mustang outside roared as if on cue, its engine echoing through the thin walls like a promise. For Lucy, everything she had ever known had collapsed and expanded in one night. She wasn't just a poor little girl with a sketchbook anymore. She was standing at the threshold of a destiny she never dared imagine, and Nathan Reed, the man who had once been Jack the Beggar, had just opened the door. The weeks that followed were a blur of signatures, phone calls, and meetings that felt more like dreams than reality for Lucy, who had once been invisible in the cafeteria. The world suddenly leaned forward to see her. News outlets picked up the story of the poor little girl who built legs for a beggar. And even though the headlines felt clumsy, even though she hated how some people spoke of her like she was a curiosity instead of a person, the truth behind it couldn't be denied. What she had built mattered. The first time she set foot inside the Einstein Academy of Advanced Sciences, her breath caught in her throat. The building towered like glass carved into the sky, sunlight scattering through its massive windows, casting prismatic rainbows across the polished marble floor. Students her age strolled the hallways with laptops and lab goggles, speaking casually about concepts Lucy had only glimpsed on late-night research binges. For a moment, she froze, her old doubts clutching at her ribs. She was the girl from Detroit who used broken toys and scavenged batteries. These kids had grown up in mansions with private tutors, at labs bigger than her entire apartment block. But then she heard the faint hiss of hydraulics. Turning, she saw Nathan Reed walking steadily down the corridor, not with his multi-million-dollar prosthetics, but with hers, the same patchwork of principles she had drawn in pencil, now polished, refined, and gleaming, but still recognizably hers. When he reached her, he bent slightly, his sharp blue eyes steady and calm. "Let them underestimate you," he said softly. "That's where you do your best work." Something in her chest steadied. She walked forward, her sneakers squeaking, against the pristine floor, and didn't look back. Classes at Einstein were brutal. Professors spoke in riddles. Assignments came in the form of problems she'd never even heard of before, and her classmates carried resumes thicker than textbooks. More than once, Lucy locked herself in her dorm room, staring at her sketchbook with tears blurring the lines. "I don't belong here," the voice whispered. "I'm just a fluke, a girl who got lucky." But late at night, her mother's voice came through. Video calls, steady and warm even through the flickering screen. "Remember what your father always said, Lucy, if you can't buy it, build it yourself. Build your place, build your confidence, build your future." And Mr. Harris, the bus driver, even called once, his deep laugh rumbling through the phone. "Told you one day they'd see, told you, kid." Still, shadows crept, whispers in the hallways about a corporation named Meditech, angry that their patents were threatened by Lucy's designs. Letters from lawyers demanding she stop her work. Meetings where Reed's absence, he was overseas, handling matters, left her exposed and trembling in front of grown men with sharp eyes and sharper words. She was 12. They were powerful, and they wanted to crush her. But what those lawyers didn't expect was the groundswell. Students who had once eyed her with jealousy now wore pins that Reed let Lucy build. Retired nurses, veterans, Even hobbyist engineers around the world began replicating her prosthetics from bamboo, bicycle parts, scrap metal. Videos surface of children in India, in Kenya, in rural Brazil, walking for the first time in years, each wearing their own variation of Lucy's design. It was no longer just hers. It had become a movement. The night Reed returned from Asia, Lucy thought her world would finally steady, but his words shook her all over again. In the quiet of the boardroom, with her mother at her side, he laid it out plainly. 3 days after you gave me these legs, I began the process of acquiring Meditech outright. Their patents will never threaten you again. They're ours now. And by ours, I mean yours. Lucy could barely process it. A billionaire had bought an empire because of something she had built on her bedroom floor. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. But above everything else, she wanted to keep building. 1 year later, she found herself standing on the stage of a rural clinic in India. Children ran through the dusty courtyard, their laughter rising like music. Some wore prosthetics painted in bright colors. Others patched together from local materials, but all of them walked, ran, lived. A little girl, no older than 7, hugged Lucy tightly around the waist, her prosthetic legs clinking softly against Lucy's own knees. Through a translator, she whispered, "You gave me wings." Lucy broke into tears. In that moment, she understood her father's words in a way she never had before. It wasn't about building things. It was about building hope. 2 years later, the Mustang came back, red and gleaming. It waited outside the Lucy Thompson Center for accessible innovation, a building that bore her name, though she was still only 14. Inside, hundreds gathered for the dedication. Reed spoke first, his voice carrying across the packed hall. 2 years ago, a child built me legs from scrap. Today, her vision builds futures for thousands. When Lucy's turn came, she stepped up to the podium, her sketchbook clutched in her hand like a talisman. She took a shaky breath. My father once told me that every broken thing still has potential. That's true of machines, but it's also true of people. Nobody is too small, too poor, or too lost to change the world. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I just wanted to help one person. Sometimes that's enough. The audience rose in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. And through the noise, Lucy spotted him, Mr. Harris, the bus driver, sitting in the front row. He caught her eye, gave her a slow nod, and mouthed the words she'd carried with her since the beginning. One day, people will see. The Mustang roared. Outside, as Reed opened the passenger door for Lucy and her mother, the sun dipped low, the horizon burning with color. As Lucy slid into the seat, sketchbook still in hand, she felt the vibration of the engine like a promise in her bones. She wasn't just the poor little girl with a notebook anymore. She was the girl who had taught the world to walk again, and this was only the beginning.